My name is Woon Tan, and I'm the host of CleanwebTV. With me today, I've got Damon Hart-Davis, who's the CEO of OpenTRV. I knew you from the Cleanweb meetup, and you're also one of the organizers. You've actually organized one of the IoT meetups for Cleanweb last year, and you are the CEO of OpenTRV Thermostatic Radiator Valve. You are also you've run previous companies including Ixaris, XNet, and BHD Multimedia Gallery, according to your your LinkedIn profile.
Well, that's not a real company, but it's just a website. But yes.
Yeah, and you're also currently the director of Kingston Community Energy.
Yes, although that's not doing anything. That's slightly annoying, and it may not get that too now because of the changes in the renewables support. But yes.
But we're here today to talk about OpenTRV.
Yeah.
So let's jump straight into it. What does OpenTRV do?
The company or the device?
Well, let's start with the device because I
Okay.
think that helps.
So, those of you who heat your homes with radiators will, at the end of the radiators, usually have something at the end that goes from frost up to, star, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay? And that's a thermostatic radiator valve. So the idea is that in the old days, in the bad old days, you used to have to try and get your rooms to the right temperature by twiddling the knob up and down to balance the flow through the radiator, which is a bloody nightmare. And a thermostatic radiator valve is nice because what it does is keep a relatively steady temperature, and human beings like steady temperatures. So the TRVs do save energy, and they're good, and they're nominally mandatory in all UK houses and so on. But in practice, people don't use them terribly well, and one thing they cannot do, which we're fixing, is turn off the heat when there's no one around to actually need it.
So you're making the thermostatic radiator valve intelligent, smart.
Yes. So look, here's our almost hot off the Shenzhen production line. It hasn't got the decals on it and stuff, and it's a bit fatter than we'd like and bigger. But it's just a normal thermostatic radiator valve. So there'll be a dial. Here's the pointer moving along here, and there'll be something from cold through to hot here. And this is all you have to do. However, if you leave it at some temperature you like, and then you go out of the room for an hour or two, and you're not likely to be back soon because it remembers your previous behaviour, it can cut the heat. And if you have it at the most, it's also more aggressive about cutting it if you're at the colder end, and it can save you up to 30% by dropping the temperature as much as 3 degrees when you're not there. And you shouldn't need, there's no instruction manual or anything, you shouldn't need it. So it looks like a normal TRV, it quacks like a normal TRV, but the aimings are to get you between 30 and 50% savings. And that's the idea, just making it slightly smarter.
And that itself is a really powerful concept because at the moment it's such that we've got so many issues with our heating that we don't actually realize how much energy we're losing.
Well, we reckon that the average UK household is wasting 50% of the energy it puts into space heating, not water heating, space heating. And actually what's terrible is that that's something like 10%, that wasted bit is 10% of the UK's entire carbon emissions, so we're hoping to get rid of that. Yet people don't like touching heating systems, they're frightened of them, or they're bored of them, or the only interaction they want is when they get a big bill in March is to whine about it. And we just know people don't touch heating, but would like it to cost a lot less, and some people would like to solve the carbon issue as well. I'm just having a discussion earlier today with a chap who's a PhD here at Imperial, who has one of the same programmable radiator valves as I did before I started OpenTRV, who finds it so complicated he's taken it off. Well, I took mine off and started OpenTRV. So the problem is, if a PhD, I've got a mere master's in theoretical computer science, he's got a PhD in it, and we can't operate a programmable radiator valve, and an ordinary mechanical one isn't cutting it in terms of energy, there's a gap. So we're trying to fill it in and make this thing do some more of the hard work for you.
What's the sort of, what's making it complicated?
Well, so a programmable radiator valve is something where you can say, right, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, please raise the temperature to 21 degrees, and then an hour and a half later knock it down to 20, and then at 6 p.m. knock it up to 22 again, and then at 10 p.m. turn it off, and then at 6 a.m. turn it on. Well, first of all, you have to set a timer, and you have to know what temperatures you want, and you have to have a regular schedule, and you have to know what that schedule is. And furthermore, these things are usually on a radiator stuck down behind something with very poor lighting. So in practice, I could hardly even read the display.
Yeah.
But it's things like press this button for 3.45 seconds, then, clap your hands together and press this one. And it's incredibly complicated, whereas the aim of this thing is it just sits there and watches your activity and works out what you generally do, and has a target temperature on it and does its best to cut heat around that. Make it do the work rather than a human being.
Okay. So Damon, tell me more about how you sort of started working on this problem. What got you involved?
All right. So OpenTRV is ultimately about cutting carbon, and I'm interested in all sorts of ways of cutting carbon. And I got into it because, my Damascene moment was in August 2007 when someone pointed out to me I had a computer room. I was running an internet service provider a little while before that, and I still had all the computer equipment, and my room would overheat and get up to 30 degrees in the summer hours, having to cool it, and I was paid by one of the big merchant banks to optimise their code, and someone pointed out to me I could optimise my energy use the same way I optimise the code. And I thought, that's quite interesting, and indeed I have. I use a third of the energy now that I used to back in 2007, yet my house is warmer and I've added 2 children to the family. So that's definitely been an interesting optimization puzzle. And then along the way, I stopped being skeptical about global warming and realised that energy wasn't really just the thing to optimize for, but carbon. And having discussions with David Mackay, who became chief scientist at DEC and wrote the Sustainable Energy Without the Hot Air, it turned out heating was a really good thing to target. So that's how I got to the start of OpenTRV, basically.
Okay, and that was how many years ago?
So October 2012, I was invited to lead a smart heating workshop at DEC, which is actually in the bowels of BIS rather than DEC, but anyway. One of the people at the meeting was from Honeywell and said, I'll give you all that kit which does all of this already, don't worry your pretty little head. And of course nothing ever turned up. So in January 2013 I thought, scratch that itch myself and created OpenTRV, the open source project. It took a little while after that to start the company, but the project has been going since Jan 2013.
Okay. And so why is it open? What makes why did you go down that route?
Interesting. Okay.
Open?
So
and how does it work?
All right. So interestingly, I have spent 20 years working in investment banking, albeit in IT, and it's made me very clear that I'm not interested in money particularly, because if I was, I'd be a trader. And all my friends say, Damon, you could have millions if you did X, Y, or Z, and I said it would bore me pantless. So money isn't a motivator for me. I am motivated to do interesting things, and good things in terms of carbon and so on. And having kids focuses the mind, because I'd rather they don't grow up in a world which is horrible. But we don't need to get excessively cuddly about it. It's a good thing to do, and it should be fun to do it. And this is a way of doing it. Now, open. So if I'm not driven by maximising profit, I can be maximising some other property. Remember, I was paid by the investment bank to optimise stuff, and you can pick what it is you're optimising. And what seems to be the right thing to optimise is megatons of carbon saved. Okay, and so OpenTRV is morphed into a social enterprise where its strategic key performance indicator, its first one, is megatons of carbon dioxide saved. The second one, as it happens, is health, because a bunch of people, maybe 10% of the population, actually has to make unpleasant decisions between eating and heating sometimes, for example, and we'd like to help them by making it go better. But nonetheless, in general, our target is about optimising carbon, and that's what the project is trying to do.
Just checking. So you sort of mentioned you're a social enterprise, and what's the why did you go down the route of being a social enterprise? Because I think that's quite an interesting.
Well, that goes with the open as well. So I think the way of generating the maximum. So I've said before that money in my pocket wasn't a huge motivator. Once I've paid for the heating bills. So what I'm quite interested in is and always have been, is generating good, a public good that other people can use, which is one reason for doing open source, by the way, because a typical example is Netscape. Netscape fell over, but they carefully put all their source code under an open source license, so when they fell over, someone called Mozilla picked it up and carried right on.
Yeah.
So the point about something like OpenTRV is even if we don't execute it perfectly, someone might be able to pick up what we've done and run with it. Okay. And a social enterprise is the same. It's about maximising the external value, because we're trying to do a public good here, which is cut carbon. And I'd like to do as much of it in a public way as possible, which is open source, and having this KPI number 1, which is carbon, and KPI number 2, which is health. And those things all go together. Now, there is a conflict. If we want to, we have a target of being on 400 million European domestic radiators in due course. And if we're going to grow a company big enough to do that, it can't be what some people call a lifestyle company, being a consultant or whatever. That requires some real commercial activity. And so we will need to protect some revenue sources, and some people hate us for doing that. But we're always going to have this open element. And part of it's self-interest, because there's a lot of really smart people out there, and if we keep stuff open, people will help us solve the problems because it helps them too. So it's just an interesting thing. Social says, I don't want all the benefits myself. I've got enough, and it's a way of sharing the benefits as widely as possible. Plus it's more fun. IT guys don't socialise enough, and this means I get to drink more beers.
So is that true that it's much more difficult if you're a social enterprise versus...
It depends what you mean by difficult. So look, if you were... So I worked with a chap who was paid several £1 million a year for turning up to work, and he got a bonus on top of it. He did his job well, and he got bored and quit in his 40s, saying there was nothing else, there's no point in him earning any more money. So was that a difficult job or not a difficult job? It certainly wasn't one he wanted to carry on doing. I'm motivated by doing interesting technology, and as long as I can go on doing that and eating and feeding my family and heating the house, it's no more difficult than working an investment bank. What's interesting about running a company with a double or a triple bottom line is that you aren't just maximising one parameter, you're maximising several. But any good engineer does that anyway. So if you build a banking application, you don't just optimise for security and then, users can't log in. You have to optimise for security and usability and back-end computing time and so on. So all you're doing is explicitly balancing a number of goals.
Right.
So it's not necessarily more difficult, it's just a different task.
I think it's really interesting to understand your sort of perspective from an engineering background and how you run a company.
When I am Richard Banson, you can take business advice from me. I haven't been CEO of a growth company before, so this is a first for me. I was CTO of a previous company which is turning over 10 million a year, Exodus, as you mentioned. But I wasn't really in the, I was nominally in the management team, but I wasn't. So, I'm learning on the job for this one.
Cool. So that's, let's sort of explore that sort of further. What's the sort of current team like?
So there's my business partner with whom I'm an equal shareholder, Mark, who, without whom none of this would happen. So Mark came up to me. OpenTRV won third prize in a British Gas. We keep interacting with British Gas. I can tell you about that later, maybe. But a British Gas competition in September 2012, I think it was, or something like that. Connecting homes. And Mark came up to me and said, "Would you like someone to help you run the non-technical bits of the company?" And I said, "Oh, yes, please." And Mark does that par excellence. So we know the funding we've raised from Climate Kick and from Innovate UK and so on would not happen if he were not doing that. And the person who's doing most of the work on the business plan and the financials is again Mark. We're equal partners because I consider us trustees of this. We're never going to make a trade exit. Now we have, it's difficult to count. It's a continuous hiring, people coming and going. We have interns and so on, and we have someone, we're doing a handover today from one employee to a new one. But I would say we have about 10 people floating around as employees or part-time employees or interns, and we probably have a similar number of people, maybe similar number of people in the open source community. But because we don't have big funding yet, no one is a really full-time permanent employee, because we might just not be able to pay them in February. So, it's pretty flexible.
So, what is the sort of current sort of business as usual that's happening right now? What's sort of keeping you up at night?
How many things have you got to do? So I normally have two roles, CTO and COO. So what's been keeping me up at night of late mostly is actually technical stuff, because we've got some very tight deadlines to deliver technical stuff, and when you're developing very fast, things get broken. All right, so I won't bore you with that, but there's been a lot of that. But we also are applying for funding with, and here's the British Gas Angle again, Ignite, which is a social impact fund of Centrica. And they have a deadline at the end of January, and we have to get business plans ready and all of this sort of stuff, and really, thoroughly understand what we are going to do this balance between, we think we've got it, but, it has to be good enough to convince us and Ignite. Now, luckily, I think Mark is probably spending more time waking up in the middle of the night sweating about manufacturing. And you saw this is he was out in Shenzhen watching the plastics being made. He's sweating about that in the business plan, and I am sweating about the firmware and, I guess, general strategy and so on. So, we'll probably split the stress. So our aim is we're trying to get in, we are getting some trials going now for this winter, and we are trying to get this funding sorted. If we get that funding sorted, that will allow us to grow.
Cool. And so how did the trip to Shenzhen go? Because I knew you went there, Mark went there a couple of weeks ago.
Yes. Very well. I think Mark would be able to better tell you than me, but he learned an awful lot about the details of manufacturing. I mean, we have been learning a lot. We are hardware and software people in terms of electronics and software, and we're perfectly comfortable with that. But when it comes to mechanics and plastics, we knew nothing, or as near nothing as you couldn't tell the difference.
Manufacturing is a whole...
And there's a whole new thing, and it's going to be absolutely critical if we're going to hit the price points we want, which is, by the way, we should get this for the record, it's £10, including VAT. You, as an end user, ought to be able to go into Argos or something and buy one of these for a tenner, including VAT, and fit it yourself, no plumber, no electrician or anything, and save enough money in the first year from that radiator for it to pay for itself. Now, at the moment, these are costing us something like, we don't know what the factory gate price is because we haven't got the first one come out of it yet. But we're expecting, say, 50, just for the sake of argument. Well, it'll need to be a factory gate price of more like £3 to hit our target. Now, we're fairly sure we can do it, but one of the aspects is getting the plastics done right. And the injection moulding, every time you do an injection mould for a piece of plastic, costs you £6,000 generally, and we had 10 pieces in there. We've managed to reduce the number of those and do the moulding better and get the cost of the moulds down to 20-odd thousand, so that we can actually make our first run of 500. And so all sorts of things like getting screw fittings and getting the collet nut at the bottom and getting the right length on the motor shaft and getting the right plastics and getting the tolerances correct. Just, it's all detail. It's all, the devil is in the detail.
And is it much more difficult operating a hardware sort of business versus running something purely on the software side, because the iteration...
Well, I say come back and ask me when I've been successful. But so sitting in a merchant bank for, on and off for 20 years or what have you, absolutely churning software and manipulating numbers to make traders happy, is probably as software as you're going to get, and it's not particularly limited by budget. You have all the tools to play with, and if you need a £2,000 piece of software, you can generally have it. Through to this thing, which is, we're playing in kind of Arduino land and stuff. No, I think what's useful for Mark and I is we have skills all the way up. I'm used to sitting with traders and delivering apps to them. Mark, done the smartphone apps and so on, all the way down to actually building electronics, soldering stuff. So we understand that there's no isolated little one piece that we have to get right. We build this better mousetrap and it's all sorted. It's about the whole package, and indeed it'll be about the marketing and the technology, I think, of getting our thing actually into those 400 million radiators. I think technology is only about 20% of the game. Right. I think it's getting the marketing, the sales channels, the routes to market, the engagement, the UI, all of the other stuff right. and the technology is really only small bits. So whether that happened to be more software focused or hardware focused, I suspect makes relatively little difference.
Right.
That's my guess. But as I say, come back and ask me in 10 years and see. Or ask Mark, who'll probably be CEO, and I'll have swapped roles or something. But, come back and ask us in 10 years' time and see how it went.
Okay. So, in terms of the business OpenTRV, what sort of customers are you looking at? Because I know you're going for social landlords and bus stops and things like that.
Oh, well, bus stops is not the... I'll come back to bus stops.
Collaborations like this.
Yes. Yeah, no, I'll come back to bus stops. No, I'm not going to put a radiator in every bus stop. That would be very popular but unwise from a carbon point of view. So our ultimate aim, if we're going to get scale, is to be on as many as possible of the domestic radiators in Europe, which is where, for central heating, gas-fired, quick response central heating with radiators is our target, and we want to be on the vast majority of those. And ultimately, we will only get there with retail. However, that means we need to do retail right. And if someone, say, like Coca-Cola, can launch a brand and it dies, and they do nothing other than be a consumer product, it just shows you the risk of doing anything in retail. And I've had a small dabble in retail myself. I was one of the very earliest internet service providers in the UK. And I know how hard it is to get retail right. Plus, you've got the cost reduction to do. So that's our target. It's about 3 years-ish from now is to be starting to get into retail in a big way. First the UK, then Europe. But coming back from that, we wanted to find and retail customers do bananas things like only think about heating when it's already cold. I think I'm the only person in the world who does insulation and boiler upgrades in the middle of summer. Because obviously you don't need it then, so it doesn't matter. But most people don't. So you go and ask a typical heating company, they'll say they sell 3 times as many units when the weather is cold as when it's warm. But, why? So the problem is cash flow is horrible for us then, because we'd have to make a whole bunch of stuff in March for people to get onto the shelves in September, for people to think about buying and not get money till December. And trade finance at 3% a month, that would kill us. So we have the health goal as well, which we've spoken about. And one way of achieving that is with social landlords who we can then have a more sane commercial relationship with, who understand you don't spend all your money on heating systems on September the 1st, you spend it throughout the year. So cash flow might be better, they might be a little bit less price sensitive. And there is, and here we come to the bus stops, the thing which is interesting, inside this, it's an IoT device. We realise it's IoT because it's got sensors, it's got an actuator, it's got a microcontroller, it's got a radio link. And although it can work standalone, it works better when connected into a network. So if your network fails, this thing will still do a reasonable job. But if it's connected, it can do something smart. And we were looking at this thinking, we'd just like to be able to plug a different sensor in here and a different one in there. And we thought, we're an IoT company. And thus, when IoT Launchpad came up, we thought we'd like to just prove the technology under here was doing the right thing. And lots of people keep reinventing the wheel for their IoT projects all the time, and software people find the hardware aspect hard. So what we are trying to do with the Launchpad project is take what we've got here and for example, our security technology in here, we have, as far as I know, the only, very liberally, that's Apache license, AES GCM implementation, which is microcontroller compatible. It's in GitHub, OT, AES GCM, go and get it. And it's the only one that implements the sort of thing that we get out of this work, and doing occupancy sensing, which is key to this, in bus stops. So the point about the bus stops was, for example, in London, the operator knows it paid £170 million back in 2007-8 in order to track all its buses in real time. It knows where all its buses are. It has no idea where its passengers are. So what we'd like to do is have a cheap, effective way for them to equip all of their 19,500 bus stops in London with something which can tell when people are waiting and send fewer buses when there's no one waiting, and send more when they are waiting, feed into the journey planner and divert people onto other routes when they're busy. Oh, and by the way, who pays for most of the bus shelters in London? The advertising companies. They'd like to know when people are actually looking at the ads. So there would be a triple win if we could take some of the technology that we developed for this, which is occupancy, and put it in there. So it's IoT. This is an IoT play. We incidentally are never, I don't say never say never, but I think that it would be a terrible error, and this is one of the things we have to learn as a technologist, not to sell this to the general public as IoT. We mustn't go selling this as a techno thing. Or we can sell a nicer one which is Apple compatible and has Chrome on it as IoT. But if we're going to sell those 400 million, this should be just sold as something which saves you energy and money.
Yeah, I think I really agree with that IoT doesn't mean anything to the
It's
consumer.
technobabble, and we want to get the technology out of the way. You don't want it's just a smart valve, but it is IoT inside, and that's how we get the bus shelters thing, and that's how we, that was the link there.
And so, in terms of IoT, the Internet of Things, so you obviously, as a company, part of this wave of connected devices that are sort of bubbling up, and what does it mean?
Well, there's been connectivity around for a while, so I'm the proud owner of a bunch of slightly rotting X10 stuff, for example. And people have been doing home automation for ages and so on. And some of it is just geeking out, so the people who want to be able to open and control their curtains. The most popular feature apparently on Hive is the fact that people can turn their heating off while sitting on their sofa. All right, so it's the remote control aspect.
Right. The most popular part of Hive is the fact that people can switch it on and off from their smartphone. And people do want to switch things on and off. Now, there are some genuine applications like making your home look occupied when you go away on holiday, or maybe you did leave the heating off when you went on holiday, or maybe you're coming home unusually early. But there have always been some home automation things, and Open Energy Monitor is a nice example of the other way of gathering the data and observing what's going on in your house. The trouble is that technology is being a bit expensive and bulky, and I think as technology gets better, by the way, we should be making smaller and smaller and smaller devices, not making them able to connect to the internet. I think the Internet of Things, the thing should never touch the internet, by the way. Part of my technical philosophy is you should always have something in between which is the guardian to protect these devices, which may have to last for 20 or 30 years, against threats on the internet which are evolving by the month. But anyway, you should get smaller and smaller and cheaper devices that anyone could have, temperature and humidity sensors in every room in their house without being bothered. And by the way, the sale to the social housing landlords is to monitor things like mould, vulnerable people not putting their heating on, and so it's the monitoring that will sell it to them. So the health.
Yes, and it only makes sense to them. But it's also if people are drying their clothes inside with the windows closed, and then they get condensation and mould, and their extensive repairs have to happen to a property, that's expensive. So social landlords are quite interested in that, and it's only worth doing it if those devices are not intrusive or expensive. So you need to get the costs down. And the other aspect, which has not been dealt with at all well until now, which is why I keep going on about the security, is the security.
Yeah.
So the fact is that Zigbee, which a lot of things are based on, is if you go and look up bee killer on the web, and you'll discover that it's completely vulnerable. A lot of stuff like Lightwave is open. Our current protocols are totally open, which means that my nightmare is if you had a nursing home, which is all OpenTRV, and we don't secure it, some bored teenager in a set of flats overlooking them can just turn all the heating off until they die or have to evacuate. So we don't want that sort of stuff. And so IoT stuff traditionally, and SCADA control systems have had traditionally very, very poor security. So a very important aspect of our launchpad and our valve stuff is to get the security aspect right and to give that away so that people can use it for free and not mess it up themselves. Thus the library I was telling you about earlier is a part of that. So Internet of Things, when only 0.1% of the population is doing it, the fact that security is appalling is interesting but not the end of the world. If 80% of EU's radiators were vulnerable to being hacked by, I don't know, that poor teenager or the Russian state or the Chinese or whatever the tomorrow's threat is, actually it's mainly compromised internet routers in Thailand appears to be the big issue of the moment, by the way. Then it's not acceptable to have no security or have it as an afterthought. So a very important part of what we're doing, I think, is making that security element work so that you are as safe in your house as if you weren't connected.
Well, and that's,
including for these valves. Hey, even the bus shelters, let me give you an example of why. If we would like to tweet, basically, the status of every bus shelter if you're that spot. You're at least saying, oh, don't get on Route 49 at the moment, it's absolutely packed, go and get on route whatever it is instead. Right? However, and that, who's selling at a bus shelter is hotly private information. I can go and stand and watch. However, if I'm a mugger and I'm looking for a target, it's 3 in the morning, and I suddenly notice that just this shelter has someone in it and no one else does, that's potentially quite sensitive information. So we ought to be able to protectively secure that information between midnight and 6 a.m. and have it not public and totally secure at that time. Still gets fed to the transport operator, still gets fed to the advertising companies with the right sort of controls, but not to the general public. So there are all sorts of aspects of smart cities and IoT where security really needs thinking hard about.
Right, very, very, very interesting. So, can you talk us through about in terms of the development of OpenTRV as a company, that you're part of this, the
Climate
Imperial,
Kick.
yeah.
So we started off as an open source project, and that will continue. But in order to commercialise this, we needed to make it commercial, and so we applied to Climate Kick. It was just we talked to Climate Kick about what we were trying to do, and they said yes, join our accelerator. And there was some other funding as well, by the way, for an initial version of that valve. So we are in Climate Kick, and as part of the Climate Kick, we are today at Imperial, in the Imperial Incubator, and it's great. It means we can come here. I've got up to kind of 10 people, and I don't have an office with space for 10 people, but we do have the Imperial Incubator, so we can have 6 of us turn up at once, and it wouldn't be a problem. So we're here, but we also got the Innovate UK money while we were developing this concept of, we're really an IoT energy efficiency company, of which the primary product set to start with is domestic energy heating saving, but we want to round it out a little bit to make sure we're not missing a trick. And we do have other things we'd like to do, like if we have OpenTRV, there are sort of 20 million houses with gas-fired central heating in the UK, each of which has a 50-watt-ish circulation pump. If OpenTRV could notice the grid is struggling and turn them all off at once, and it would be easy to do, by the way, that's a gigawatt of energy we've just cut from the grid demand. That's really quite significant. That's on the same scale as what National Grid has commercially available. Okay, so there are all sorts of things like that. So we're thinking of it's energy efficiency. Our kind of vision is, our mission is to provide energy efficiency and carbon saving for Joe everybody. You don't need to be a geek to have the benefit of our stuff. So that means making simple stuff like this with a single dial that does the job. Okay. And so the company has grown from just being this open source thing addressing this particular issue to now with a proper plan and a vision of where we want to be in 3 and 5 years and beyond, trying to get funding so that we can actually get onto those 80% of European domestic radiators with manufacturing. So we had some angel funding which paid for us to do the manufacturing basically. We expect to be a growth company, a multi-million pound company. And then that's interesting because if you're a social enterprise, how do people get their money back? These are some of the aspects that we have to deal with.
It's very interesting. And it just reminds me that you're also part of the Impact Hub crowdfunding campaign, or crowdfunding cause that you're part of.
Yes, that was interesting.
So I'm guessing that's something that you might be going down.
Well, we would very much like. I mean, Ignite has been wonderful to work with, by the way. It's also great to have the chance to talk to the CEO of Centrica, which is and say, you should be decoupling a bit and selling the service, not the energy. And he didn't say, yes, I'm giving it all up, or no, we're not doing any of that. So it's an interesting chat. But no, I do very much hope that we continue to work with Ignite, who have been great and supportive and helped us realise that we are a social enterprise. But, we can't count our chickens. And if we're not going to go fut, then we need to look at alternatives if that doesn't work. And one of those is crowdfunding. And we'd probably do a couple of stages of that if we did it. We'd probably do it for product first, product stroke rewards, and then do it for equity or something like that. But, we'll talk to other impact funds or so on. But crowdfunding is one possibility, and because we've got physical product, we would pass many of the kind of sniff tests for people like Kickstarter these days. We've got physical product which is working, and we'll have some tests for and stuff, which is good. You know, it's not just vaporware.
Cool. Let's see. So, in terms of, say, if we were in the year 2021.
Sounding like it should be the start of that in the year 2025, whatever, 25.
You know, looking back, what would you say OpenTRV have sort of achieved? What would be some of the highlights that you want?
The thing we're aiming for is to move the needle on carbon saving, and you know, I'm sure. You know, there are no guarantees of success by any particular metric. I think we have a reasonable chance. We really have a significant chance of knocking several percent of the UK's entire carbon footprint, and indeed across the whole of Europe. And now, if you're saying 6 years from now, we will be starting to make an impact. I think I set a nominal internal target, I don't know if it's survived in the business plan, of having knocked 1% off the UK's carbon footprint cumulatively, as it were, by about that time. Now, you know, that suggested internal target may not have survived, but that would be, you know, I'd hope we would be there, that we'd have moved the needle. Someone could tell OpenTRV existed because of that little chunk of carbon that went away from the UK's emissions.
Right, very powerful, very sort of inspiring statement for your organisation, I guess.
We're also, by the way, going to have fun. Because we're technologists and we're going to have fun doing it, and we're going to be creative and do exciting things, and you know, because we're not driven by making money, so we're not going to just be slogging away for 5 years to get there. We're going to have fun on the way as well, otherwise it's not going to hang together.
So for people who are interested to find out more about OpenTRV, what's the best place to go?
Twitter account at OpenTRV, website opentrv.uk. Yes, I know we need to redo it. We've got mailing lists. Essentially all of our stuff is published on GitHub. There will be a few bits which we have to retain to generate predictable revenue streams from the business, but basically everything we can is published on GitHub, and if you really want to, you can just drop us an email, opentrv@opentrv.uk, and we'll attempt to respond. We'll probably be overwhelmed by spam now, but anyway. And we do talks, and we are at events. We've got a public calendar in Google as well. If you go and look up our open calendar, you can see the events we're participating in as well. And if anyone's going to get to see this before the end of January, we will be at FOSDEM as well, drinking beer and pretending to do technology.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much, Damon. It's been a pleasure chatting, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Cleanweb Conversations podcast. Are you interested to learn more about the Cleanweb movement? Head over to cleanweb.tv. That's cleanweb.tv.